I thought it would be nice to build a small outdoor side table that I can give away as a present. I wanted to make the frame out of rebar, which has this very interesting look and texture, and the top out of some oak that I had left over from another dining table build. Oak is quite resilient when it comes to rot, so it should be a good choice for a project like this. And like most projects involving solid wood, this one started on the jointer planer. I first milled the faces flat and parallel, and then the edges perpendicular to the faces. I found that this little plastic serving tray happened to be of the right size for my tabletop. For the glue up I used common waterproof wood glue. And I used my homemade bar clamps to hold these pieces together. These homemade clamps are hands down the best clamps that I have. They operate really smoothly and they exert a lot of clamping force. So if you're into this kind of thing, I highly recommend building a bunch of those. And a couple of hours later, I took the blank out of the clamps. Using a compass, I then iterated the center of the circle and then roughed it out on the bandsaw. Currently I don't have a router table or any circle cutting jig, so I used my table saw instead. And I used a small Allen head machine screw as a pivot point. Then I sanded the piece up to 240 grit. And I chamfered the edges. And I also filled the hole in the center with construction adhesive to keep insects and spores from getting into the wood. And finally I gave it a nice finish using countertop oil. I reapplied it over the course of the next couple of hours until the wood would not absorb any more oil. And after half an hour more, I wiped off the excess. And whilst the finish was curing, I built the frame. I made this template for the piece that's gonna connect the legs to the top. Now you're probably asking yourself, why this shape? The reason is that this part serves three purposes. It connects the legs to each other, it connects the legs to the tabletop, and it's gonna keep the top from warping. Not from expanding and contracting, it's just gonna keep it from warping. And in order to do that, it has to span the entire diameter across the grain. And that's what that long centerpiece is there for. And the screws will slide in these slots to allow for shrinkage and expansion. Next, I made the legs out of 10mm rebar. I bent the rebar around a piece of aluminium round stock, which was way harder than I had anticipated. But after a bit of struggling, I got them bent to the right shape. I set up this piece of hardboard on my workbench so that I could lean the legs against it and this way determine their angle. I decided to weld on these discs to give the legs some more support on soft soils. Then I added these pieces to keep the legs from collapsing outwards. They were pretty strong before, but these stretchers really give the entire thing a massive boost in structural rigidity. And after wire brushing and degreasing the frame, I gave it 3 coats of black metal paint. And here detecting a couple of dry spots. And now it was all done. Admittedly not an overly spectacular project, but sometimes it can be quite nice to build something that doesn't involve any moving parts. And yes, this can also be used as a stool.